Hello, so welcome to our webinar. You'll be looked after today by myself, Vicky Collier. I am Inoapps' Global Head of Enterprise Change, and my good friend Aaron Werner, who is the Transformation Manager for the Church of England. I just wanted to take a moment to thank you all for joining. It's a lovely day outside, so we hope we can keep your attention inside rather than out in the sunshine. Just wanted to sort of say this is a follow-up to a session that we ran back in March before the world changed. So we ran a service excellence event at Manchester Old Trafford football ground. It was very well attended, and we spent the day sharing ideas around organisational transformation and how to get the outcomes that you're looking for when you're sort of undertaking an organisational change such as an ERP transformation. Aaron agreed to run this follow-up session today. He's a very interesting speaker, so I'm sure you'll find it really engaging. I'm going to hand over to Aaron now, but please feel free to ask questions at the end of the session. Aaron, I'm going to hand over to you now.
Thank you, Vicky, and welcome to everybody. So I'm going to start today just by giving you an introduction to myself. I was born in Australia, a degree in psychology, been consulting for about 8 years throughout Canada, US and the UK, specializing in HR and systems, and now work specifically on transformational projects. I've been leading the people and data program for the church for the last 18 months. And when people traditionally think of the Church of England, they think of their local church or the largest cathedral in their area. And what we are is actually much more complex. It took me, and it still takes me now, time to get my head around it, but we're actually made up of over 100 different legal entities, all with individual control around everything they do regarding people and sometimes actual laws. 700 years we've been operating with laws that govern us, sometimes as old as that as well. So sometimes it's quite difficult to navigate that through. When we start looking about the breadth of the organization, sometimes we start looking at, just all the land and buildings and churches and vicarages and cathedrals that they own, but also the investment fund. And effectively, we haven't even talked about the educational arm, and I'm sure many of you have children that possibly are going to Church of England schools. So when we kind of break all of that down, we actually have more churches than Tesco, which is Oracle's largest departmental organization that is working with them. And then if everyone in the church did something or was paid, even if that was a penny, then effectively we would have more employees than the NHS, which is the current largest employer in the UK. So quite a drastic and wide spanning audience, but also different complexities that are in place as well. In regards to, when we say, one of the things we like to say about Church of England is that we don't do change very well. But in reality, when we think about how long this existed, this organization was formed in 1534. And we start thinking about all of the things that I started thinking about all the different things that actually happened coming from Australia. Australia wasn't even founded till 1901. Computers in the workplace didn't happen until 1998. We as an organization didn't even take our payroll off Excel to a system till 2012. So what we're trying to undertake with this program of work is actually quite drastic, but goes against that traditional sentiment that an organization or an institution, whether that's government or education or the church, doesn't do change very well. In fact, they do. They're just a big steamboat that takes a while to turn. So one of the things that we're doing is trying to create a national register. And there's an interesting quote that we found when we were going through our archives, which was actually in 1603, effectively, the organization wanted to start to create a national register. But the fact is they couldn't. They've been trying to do it ever since. But the technology just wasn't available for them to be able to do that. And I'll go into more detail as to why that is. So the benefits that we're seeking from this program is 3 core objectives, and that's the creation of a national register of clergy who have a bishop's license or permission to officiate. That's quite important. Like most organizations, we would like to know who is in our organization and what they're doing. Now, considering that we're a federated model made up of many different legal entities, that's been quite difficult to get that single person record at this stage. So to make that happen, we also needed to have a consistent management of people data across the national church institutions and the wider church, and a quite intelligent integration platform that connects all of these systems. So as I want to make sure that when I'm sharing with you what we're doing at the church is that I'm tying it back to the wider change management and transformational projects, I just wanted to touch here on something that's actually really key for transformational projects is to have 3 core objectives, as everything else in your project will stem from that: your design principles, your benefits guide, etc. And when you implement any transformational project, there should be a transformational reason. I want to cut down on administrative time or cost or resource in my organization is not a true transformational reason. I always think about what will be the reason that you did this project in 10 to 15 years. What will stick? So trying to do a 21st digital cloud transformation in this landscape can be challenging for honestly the most patients of it all. But really, by having those 3 core objectives, you and those in your organization are always able to tie those decisions back to that. So some of the complexities for the church that we hold in our program is that we have a mixture of office holders and employees. So we have about 21,000 office holders and 1,000 employees. And about 7,000 in our phase 1 of license holders. There's some legal differences between those terminologies in regards to what we can call them. So we've had some challenges with Oracle kind of saying, hey, we can't use things like employee number because our office holders can't be considered employees. So it's down to that granular detail that effectively we've had to really look and understand what the right system, process, and methodology was during this build. The other thing that's really interesting is the church does not legally exist. It's actually made up of 120 legal entities, and within those are 21,000 different legal officers that all have their own legal responsibilities. So trying to bring all of that together is challenging, but it's also very fun. The other part with clergy is that there's no line management, there's no oversight, and officers are usually combined to meet the needs of the people rather than your traditional organizational need, which is I have a project team and I have a project controller, so that person reports into me, very clear. Clergy, though, works in a much more fluid way, which is a brand new community of new build was created, and therefore they need a vicar to look after them. How do we make that happen? So it's not your usual structure you'd find in public, private, or even third sector. And then we're historically siloed because of the legal disconnection that happened when the church was formed. So we can't run traditionally like a PLC where we can kind of have one authoritative figure at the top that says, you can do this, unless it so happens that the Queen make a change, but don't see that happening. Now talking specifically, what did we actually do? So in 2017, we started our feasibility stage. So we first engaged Inoapps during that phase, and they helped us understand the Oracle product. We're engaging with other partners to understand different products. And we wanted to get a real understanding of what implementation would look like to better understand our procurement process. But also what we were doing during that time was starting our change management journey. We were engaging with every single operational person throughout the entire organization who transacted in people data to understand what they did and what workarounds was created and what part did they play in that. And that really took us in a different from a change management point of view. In 2018, we started our procurement phase. So we again went through a completion of our feasibility studies, understanding if the product would work, and then really kind of narrowing it down with Oracle in regards to, well, what could work for us and how do we benefit the platform that we are possibly looking to procure. So quite a considerable 2017, 2018 going through that. And we got lots and lots of pressure. Hey, do you want to buy our product? And so on and so forth. But we were needing to make sure as an organization that we were making the right decision, not the rushed decision. We then entered into our discovery and validation phase. So what we did is we engaged Inoapps for 3 months, and we effectively went through what most people would do after contraction with Oracle or your implementation part, which is requirements gathering. We actually did that beforehand. So we went 3 months and said, right, through it with, ask us all the questions, here's our processes, and really tell us whether this is going to work or it's not. Then effectively we got a lovely document that kind of went, right, this is what you can do, this is what you can't, and here are your challenges. We then spent another 3 months validating that. And it was requiring both Oracle and Inoapps to get creative, to be innovation. Yeah, it's really looking at it in a different way. And all of this was done before we actually procured a system or a partner. Really important, because what it did is it reduced our risk profile. And it wasn't until the second half of 2019 that we actually signed our contract with Oracle and Inoapps, and we started our project mobilization and the start of the construction of the system. So partners, it's key, whoever you choose, that you have a partner who's going to be with you. For us, we felt that Inoapps had been with us since, as one of the partners, many partners that we're engaged with at the beginning, that they ended up being with Oracle and this product the right fit for us. And that was because we knew as a partnership that it was not just going to be taking requirements and building an as-is project or a product. This was a truly transformational program of work, and we needed a partner who'd be creative, innovative, and I think more importantly, humble and patient. And the reason I say that is because never done before regards to office holders and what we were trying to actually accomplish. So every single person, both my core team and their core team and Oracle's team working with us, everyone's learning every day, and we don't expect anybody to have all of the answers. And that humility on both sides comes through every day that we work with them, and it's quite good in that context. So what's the difference between transformational change and your standard change? Well, the significant difference is that in a standard approach, you'll lift and shift current systems and processes and move them to a system, which is great when you're doing implementation, because your partner will just go, right, tell us all your processes, give us all this data, it must be clean, and then hand it over. In a transformational project, it's never going to work that way, and even more so when you're moving to a SaaS product, because as we all know with the Oracle product, it's adopt, not adapt. So your on-premise solution, whether that be Oracle previous or whether that be another solution, things are going to change. Your data will not be what you need it to be. So you need to think about everything in a different way, whether that's frameworks, governance, change management, communicates, all different. And it all starts in a partnership way of asking the right questions. And I will say, usually what I like with my sessions is to be extremely interactive, but obviously we're not in person. So I'm going to ask Vicky if she would help on this next part, just to kind of talk about how partnership starts with asking the right questions. So Vicky.
Hi. Yeah.
Hi.
Hello.
Got a question for you. What car would you like?
A Land Rover Discovery.
Okay, I'm sorry. I only meant a small car. So now that you know that, can I ask, what type of car would you like?
A Mini.
A Mini. Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't clarify that well enough. I only meant a hatchback. So, okay, now that we've determined that you want a small car and it's a hatchback, what color would you like?
White.
White. Okay, unfortunately, I meant what shade of purple. So, you know,
Okay.
we're not doing too well here. Well, we're getting there. We're getting there. So, what about age? How old do you want the car?
I want the latest reg.
The latest registration. So you want a purple small hatchback latest registration. Unfortunately, I didn't ask the right question, and I only meant that you could choose between 1970 and 1972. So I apologize about that. But, you know, that's what you get, but that's your forced result. So by asking questions in that type of way, where we're not giving, where we're not hearing from our partners, or we're not asking as clients to our partners, or whatever the process is in your project, what you're doing is predetermining your result and not allowing those in that question making process to be able to come up with something different. So this lovely monstrosity 1972 horror thing is what you end up with, Vicky. So if I may, I want to try asking that in a little bit of a different way. So Vicky, I have this purple 1972 hatchback I want to give to your business for marketing. It's factory settings at the moment. However, if we were to increase the power, the value would increase. So that's a good thing. So we should do that. And to make sure you're leveraging that investment, we need to make sure you can drive it. So we've got to put the correct wheels on the car. It's got to be safe. It's got to be insurable. And finally, to make sure that you look awesome and you're going to use it and you're going to get that return on that investment, I recommend you update the color to something more modern to give you that modern feel. Would you like me to go ahead with those adjustments before delivering it to you?
Yes, please.
Okay, so now that I've kind of framed and given Vicky a framework of what we're trying to do, and I've outlined the benefits and kind of almost told her what barriers that she's playing within, but at each barrier highlighting those different kind of positive attributes she's going to get, what you get is a much different vehicle. It's still a horrid 1972 vehicle, but it looks completely different. And that's because it's a collaborative result rather than a forced result. And I think that's important. And I use cars as an easy one because it's all different and it's easy to tell what something standard out of the box is, which is your forced result. That's your non-transformational project. And actually a collaborative result, which is about asking questions and hearing the information because you do not know what you don't know about the platforms that you're using. So what does that mean in this context? Well, in this context, broken down transformational versus standard. So things in transformational that we want to be looking at is that we need to redesign our categorization, business processes. We need to make sure communications and change management coordination. Data will need to be classified and cleansed. And please do not underestimate that task. Reporting requirements are going to be completely different. Critical decisions are going to be a lot, but if you've got your 3 core principles in place, those can be made at a project side. Change management is going to be far and going to be wide, and project to product is not seamless. And I think that that's something that all organizations need to kind of understand, because you've got now a many to one owner. Standard though, lift and shift, pretty much light touch all the way, everything will be ready, changeable in middle, project to product is seamless, and one owner throughout. However, looking at that, you're like, well, why would I ever do a transformational project? It just seems that the risk profile is heavily increased. Well, we need to understand the new world and the world that we're waking to. So traditionally, you would have best of breed. You'd have a HR system off to the side, a payroll system, a finance system, maybe some workforce analytics BI tools sitting in. But the problem that causes is conflicting data telling different stories. So as an organization, you wouldn't be able to look at contingent workforce planning. You wouldn't be able to look at your strategic workforce planning when thinking about reorganizations, even more so when we're thinking post-COVID and what that means in regards to flexible working and how is that adopted? Is it liked? Is it not? What are humans feeling? What are the people feeling? Because you end up with different owners in this siloed world. When you connect it, you need to have that one authority voice. Otherwise, you will not meet your objectives, because what you will end up having is all of those different colors of group will be like, yeah, we're connected, that's great, but I want, and that's where you end up creeping quite hard up. Whereas if it's all tied back to one owner meeting those 3 core objectives, you're going to save yourself a lot of pain in that management journey. So obviously moving into the change management. So this is probably a diagram that you are all familiar with. It's the Kubler-Ross change curve. Basically talks about how the moral incompetence goes when you go a period of time throughout a major change. And this is change whether we are talking about individuals going through change in their lives. So if we think about what we went through with this COVID pandemic, first off, it was denial. No, it's never going to come to the UK. Then frustration, which is like, okay, like, why are we getting these press conferences? What's going on? depression kicks in, which is like, I'm stuck at home for 10 weeks. Oh, what's going on? I live at home, so my only relationship I currently have is with my Tesco lady. Then we get into the experiment, which is where we currently are at the moment, which is really around that, oh, I can meet people, but it's in the park and it's got to be 2 meters. How can I make that work? But I'm not quite fully comfortable with it yet because I can't see my elderly mother. So that's where experiment has that multitude of different emotions tied to it. And then obviously you get to that decision, which is, okay, this is the new world, at least until there's a vaccine, this is what I do. So this is exactly something every single one of us on this call is currently going through in some shape or form in different ways, but effectively following this curve. What does that mean in the context of a transformational program, especially when we're talking about programs that have to do with software implementation? So a traditional technology project will usually follow these guides. You're in denial at the procurement stage because you're really like, do I really need to spend this? And that is a true place to be. Then you get into frustration when you're at the requirements gathering stage because you've signed all the contracts and it's starting to go, hang on, it does what? Really? That doesn't make sense to me. Then you're in UAT, and then that's when you're hitting depression because you're just like, all of those things that I created and I wanted in my old system, I can't do. It's just not working for me. Then it gets to deployment, and that's really where you've got that, experiment, like, okay, I could do this and I could do that, and so on and so forth. And then you get to that decision, and that usually traditionally for technology project is 1 year after business as usual. So 1 year after deployment is usually when you get there. So for the Church of England, we took a little bit of a different approach. We decided effectively that when we start thinking about our process is we go, right, feasibility, procurement, discovery, validation, build, those were effectively our stages that we went through. But I want to draw your attention to the second red line. That is when we decided to sign the contract and to start the build. We didn't do it beforehand. We did our feasibility study, and that's where we went through that initial denial, like, really, we need a new system. Frustration was around the procurement, going, okay, so we can't choose the cheaper system because it's not going to give us what we want, and then we start thinking about the discovery. So when we get to the discovery, we're obviously talking about depression, and everyone will get depressed when going through discovery. However, it's important to know that this is good. It helps understand where your pinch points are, and you'll hear and probably say, oh, really? It doesn't do that? That's weird. Then you get to validation. So here is where we experimented, again, before we even signed the contract. See, in validation, this is where we get to challenge and work with our partners to work out how to give you what we're after, and whether that's innovation, optimization, or possibly disruption on the current norm. This is key to involve those operational people that you feel will be challenges throughout your deployment. And this is really key, so I'm going to repeat this. It's key to involve those operational people that you feel will be challenges throughout deployment at this stage. Let's remember that some people are challenging throughout the transformational change. It's because they were part of the solution that you are trying to fix. An example would be someone came up with a workaround and it currently works, but it's a workaround, so it's not optimized. What we are looking to do, if you're doing this program of work, is you're looking to override that change and do it in a different way. They are now feeling as though their contribution is not valued. If you bring them into the creative process, they will share what works and what doesn't, and then they'll be part of ownership. And people defend, by its very nature, we defend what we own. And then we get to the contract signature, right, we're ready to go into build. And this is where key design principles are agreed and your project team are able to make technical decisions for the organization based on those, rather than having to go through the curve once the build starts again. So before I kind of get off this slide, I just really wanted to kind of make sure I'm saying it. Traditionally, the first red line is where you would normally make your contractual agreements and say, right, I want to start the build now. What we have found throughout this entire process is that by elongating that out, what we actually do is reduce our risk profile, and that's quite key. So as we then work into the new world, and I honestly didn't, when I put this slide together, I wasn't thinking new world in the context of post-COVID, but rather new world of what to take into consideration for a transformational program, is a key item for all organizations going through SaaS implementation must understand product ownership. And because it's very easy to have a senior responsible officer, it's very easy to have a program director. But once you hand those items back to business as usual, a product owner needs holding all of that. So you could have multiple. Now what you need to be doing is thinking about, actually, how can I have a single product owner? And that should be something that you should be thinking about during your build process, because it will eliminate the challenges internally that you will face around deployment and negating resistance. The second key thing is understand what's required before starting. And I know that that sounds like a normal thing. However, there is a difference between knowing what you want and knowing what is available and knowing where you can compromise. And that is, in my opinion, why doing discovery and validation before any contractual agreement is absolutely paramount, because it will outline all of the items internally you need to achieve before major project costs start to be incurred. Again, the third one is, and you're probably hearing it in my voice, is don't be afraid to take your time. Elongate discovery and validation. It's less expensive. Your risk profile is reduced, because that increases the moment you contractually in the build phase. So all in all, what you want to be doing is pushing all of your risk to the start of your program. So once you're at build, it just becomes a downhill transgression. And I'm happy to take questions, and I'm happy to speak offline if anyone wants to pick my brain about how we managed to do that. But what I can say is, even during when the pandemic hit, our project was the only one within the Church of England at this stage, especially a technology project, that wasn't affected because we took this methodology. It was actually quite seamless, and even more so working with Inoapps is that, we didn't have to worry because all of that risk was front loaded. And then finally, just to give you guys a little bit of a timeline, is we started the feasibility in 2017, and we aren't looking to go live in 2020 until 2021. Our deployment hasn't been delayed by COVID at all. So we've actually kind of, as you can see, front loaded all of our risk, and then only assumed what risk we had to when we got to the end of the program as we go into UAT and training phase. So hopefully what I've done today is a couple of different things. Well, my three things that I wanted to do was, one was to give you a little bit of explanation on what the church is doing, and taking on this massive piece of work and trying to figure out how we can get a one-person record for everyone who's connected to the church. When we think about our future phases, that could be your gardener or whoever else when we're thinking about safeguarding. And the second thing I was hoping to show you was some key takeaways when thinking about change management around bringing certain people on the journey at certain times will reduce your risk profile for when you actually look to deploy and have those change agents in BAU. And then the third point was around elongating the initial phases of your program to reduce your risk profile. I know that sometimes goes against our innate nature to go, well, I've got the money now and I want to show that I'm delivering. I really want to show that. Well, delivering against reducing risk is more important than building something that won't be operational, because it will cost you a lot more at the end. So hopefully through today's session, I've been able to give you that. You've been able to take that. And just as a closeout now, I'd just like to say thank you very much for your time and listening to me, and I will hand over to Vicky.
Thank you very much, Aaron. I actually had someone message me with, well, I've got a question or something I think is quite interesting that I'd like to tease out. And I think we've also had a couple of questions messaged, but we will open up the floor to anyone who would like to ask any questions. So we've got some time left if anyone's got anything that they'd want to delve into in a bit more detail. But Aaron, one of the things that I wanted to bring out, because I think that was an awesome presentation, and I think there's so many different topics we've touched on during the church's program, and one of them we touched on was around the concept of office holders. And I just wondered if you could, I mean, I could lead the question a bit more, but I just wondered if you could just talk about the sort of the concept you highlighted to me at one point during the program around sort of this being the first time that actually any ERP system has been able to cater for office holders.
Yeah, I'm happy to. So office holders are, I'm going to use a perfect example that many of us would actually be familiar with, is the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister's office, it will always be in existence. So the email address primeminister@gov.uk will always exist. The person sitting in that is sitting in that for a period of time. So part of what we had to do is make sure that that office was always there in its legal capacity, but we also wanted to make sure that the system did not do one of the key things, which is that address it being an employee. So an office holder doesn't have a line manager, an office holder doesn't get approvals for annual leave, things like that, can self-approve expenses up to a certain period. An office holder works 24/7, big one. When you think about work patterns, they don't exist for office holders. It's that they have to hold the office, it's in their capacity. So really what we ended up having to do was really break the mold. But unfortunately, we have employees as well and license holders. So it added complexity that we needed to say to Inoapps, and we needed to say to Oracle, yeah, we want to keep all that Oracle does, but also we need to do all these other things. And I think the Prime Minister is a great example in the fact that that office will always exist. It's the same for the Bishop of Manchester or the Archbishop of Canterbury. Justin Welby is just sitting in that post at this particular present moment, and when he retires, somebody else will go directly in that, but it'll always exist, and the legalities of it will always exist. So it's not as simple as a restructure and you've gone. There's actual legal obligations that are in common law that need to be adhered to.
Awesome, thank you very much. We've actually had a question from Becky from St Andrews University, and she would like to know, how do you ensure that you are involving a wide enough representation of people when everyone is so siloed and there are so many people to involve?
It's a really good question. So one of the things that we undertook at the same time that we were doing our discovery with Inoapps, so again, before we had signed any contractual agreements with Oracle, is we ended up doing roadshows around the country. We held 8 of them in total, and a total of 490 people attended these roadshows. And effectively what we did is that we want to speak to everybody who effectively touches data or people data. And what we did is we outlined our effectively our brief, what we were looking at, what challenges, and again, tying it back to those core objectives. And we then got feedback at those sessions as they were collaborative around, have you thought of this, and can you think of this? And what we also found were the things that we didn't know that would be really, really easy to implement, such as everyone in the Church of England who is ordained has and this is going to sound very normal, but has a HR file, what they call a blue file, but it's a HR file. That is in paper, and it travels from diocese to diocese as a person moves from diocese to diocese. Knowing where that is sometimes quite difficult, because it could be sitting in a bishop's drawer, or it could have never traveled from the previous diocese. So we heard at those roadshows, wouldn't it be great if you could just have a field in there that said blue file location, and it's just chosen between the 42 dioceses? We would have never have thought about something like that. But the moment that that was picked up on, we were like, that's an easy win. So we found by bringing all of those 400 people together, we found lots of really good carrots for our change management journey. But then what we were able to do is so I guess from your question is, we were able to specify within the specific regional offices to have one dedicated person who would be involved in the project in some shape or form. So what we've done is we've then curtailed 420 people down to 42. We regularly communicate the program and what we're doing and their involvement. We regularly hold Zoom webinars, show them the systems, get their inputs on certain specific things. But what we're not doing, and I think this is key, what we don't do is open up the entire system to everybody and say, have a play around. It's multi-million pound systems, you don't play around. It's like driving a Ferrari on your learner's license to the shop. It shouldn't be executed in that way. So the key I always find is that there's a particular item, and let's say in your instance, education, university, okay, I'm thinking work patterns and how that works with tenure in your educational arm and teachers and all of that, is find those people that are really after it and then ask them to decide who that nominated person is. So therefore you're engaging on one person. But if you just speak to them about work patterns, you don't have to worry about engaging them on absence plans or worried about how to think about how to get them on board with payroll or any of those other elements. So it's targeted approach. But when you're talking to the wider group, you're always keeping to those 3 core objectives that you set out. At least that's the way that we have done it. We've also then got some nominated people who will join in on some of our prototyping sessions, our application walkthroughs. So what we do is we spread that net wider and farther as we get closer and closer to deployment. And that approach seems to be working quite well. They're feeling involved, engaged. But my core team and me specifically are not feeling overburdened by everyone hammering me with 1,000 different technical requirements that don't really fit the objectives of what we're trying to achieve. So hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you very much, Aaron. Becky, if that answered your question, then great. But if you would like any further information on that question, just drop us a line. Aaron did say that he'd be happy to have some follow-up conversations with anyone that wanted to reach out to him. I do know that Becky asked another question actually, so I'll move on to that, and it's actually a really interesting one. So basically, she wants to know, how did you know which implementation partner? I know the answer to this, but I'll let you answer, Aaron. How did you know which implementation partner to select when you were going through discovery and validation without knowing which software you were buying? And I know in this instance that isn't the case for you, but I'll let you talk through the process you went through.
Yeah, so I think what we decided, Becky, is that we landed on 2 before we started on discovery, which was Oracle and another platform. And that other platform was effectively in our scoring system was second, just barely, but second. So as an organization, we said we would enter into discovery with the preferred option at that stage with one of the preferred partners. So we obviously did an assessment on all of the partners and we found the partner that was right for us, which was Inoapps. So what we intended to do was go through discovery. If at the end of discovery, we were determined that actually if Oracle couldn't do what we needed it to do, we would flip and do discovery with the secondary vendor or supplier from a different platform. As it turned out, we were quite happy with what we saw post at the end of discovery, but we wanted to go, there were effectively 3 key areas we wanted to investigate further, and that's what we spent 3 months going through validation with to make sure that we were 100% feeling like we had decoupled our risk profile in this space. So I don't ever suspect any organization will end up and just go, right, I'm really, really happy with this one supplier, let's just go ahead. You will always be in that, oh, some people like this and some people like that, because different systems offer different benefits. Not one offers all. I will never pretend to think that way. But I think that you'll, as a governance group, there should be effectively a leaning one way, but keeping in mind that actually, if it doesn't work, you can pull the plug at any stage and you can revert and do discovery with the second one. Hopefully that helps.
Thank you very much, Aaron. I have a question around shared services. So I think it's quite an interesting setup at Church of England with the way the NCIs work. And I just would it be possible to just delve into the sort of the different stakeholder groups that you need to think about from you've got your sort of corporate NCIs, but then they're looking after all of the different areas and how you've handled that.
Yeah, we're made up so I work specifically for the National Church Institutions. It is not a head office, but it does offer the church some shared services where it's legally able, and that's made up of 3 bodies. It's made up of the Church of England Pensions Board, the Archbishop's Council, and the Church Commissioners. Church Commissioners feeds directly into Parliament, Archbishop's Council through to the Archbishop and in the monarch in that kind of context, and the Pensions Board is obviously for the pensions of the clergy and also the investment fund that feeds off that. So I have a very, very convoluted process just within the National Church Institution. So I have a central government body. Effectively, they run very much like a central government body. I have a very corporate body that has all the traditional questions that you would think about when thinking about a corporate entity. So thinking about return on investment, thinking about capitalization and all of those other elements. And then I have another body that is thinking, we've been here since 1503. So don't talk to us about 5-year return on investment, talk to us about where we're going to be in 20 years. So 3 different bodies that we represent at the National Church Institutions. And then I have 42 dioceses, which is the regional area your local church or local education arm is connected to. So we have a lot of differing agendas, which at the beginning was quite difficult as we got to the end of feasibility study. And that is where the methodology of the 3 core objectives came about, was that those were 3 very core objectives that all 3 bodies could agree on, believed was correct, and believed that it had merit, also believed that it fit what the church was trying to do in regards to being transparent around its people, and to make sure that we're safeguarding those that we have moral responsibility for, whether those be children or vulnerable adults. So from a project transformational point of view, I report into roughly about 15 different governance boards, but slowly they've been making it much easier, because once you understand what they're after, effectively it all ties, one's interested in one core objective, so I can always redirect that whatever message or what they're wanting to hear from the program effectively back through that core message. So if you've got a convoluted stakeholder group and a convoluted governance board, tying it back to those core objectives would probably be anybody who's a project or a program director on the call would be your saving grace. It was about 18 months before we figured it out.
Thank you very much for that answer. So I think that's it for the questions for today. So I'd like to thank everybody for joining us. We hope you found it interesting. If anybody would like more information, then feel free to reach out and we'll set you up with a chat with Aaron. And as I said at the start, this was a follow-up session to our Service Excellence event that we ran back in March. Now, we made a commitment in March that we would set up a change management community whereby anybody who is sort of interested in organisational change and transformation can join that community, and it's an open forum for sharing ideas and getting support from your peers on solving the challenges that you're going to be undertaking. I've put up on the screen the LinkedIn, the URL for the LinkedIn group, so please feel free to register to become a member. We've already got some good content on there from different organisations, so not just Inoapps, and we will be running these events more often, and we would welcome your suggestions for any topics that you'd like us to cover, and if anybody would also like to speak at an event or share some knowledge or learning, then you are more than welcome to. So with that, please go off and either enjoy your working day or try and find an hour to spend in the sunshine without anybody noticing too much.